Do you ever find that your mixes sound static and lifeless compared to your favourite songs? Well, this one simple trick helped me to add depth and excitement to my mixes whenever I felt like they were sounding dull. It's called the Submaster trick, and it helps to remedy all those problems I just described. So in part 1, I'll be covering what a Submaster is and why you need one. Part 2 will be looking at how you can implement this into your own mixing template, and part 3 will be a demonstration of the creative ways you can use this unique trick. Before we get into the video, if you've been looking to improve your mixing skills and progress your career, then consider checking out Sage Audio's Mixing and Mastering membership. For joining, you'll get 50 free mastered songs per year with your own trusted mastering engineer, one-to-one mentorship from the Sage Audio team, coupled with access to in-depth mixing and mastering courses available through the Sage Audio University platform. I'll have more on that towards the end of the video. So before we get into the technique, let's briefly cover what a Submaster actually is and why you need one for this trick. The term Submaster can often be used interchangeably with other terms like mix bus, pre-master bus, and so on. Basically, all you need to know is that the Submaster is like a copy of your actual master bus, which is usually the slightly wider track that is located on the left or right hand side in most DAWs. This is what my master bus looks like in Reaper, and I'll throw a few more on screen from other DAWs just so this is made clear. A Submaster is a copy of this that is routed before the master bus, not after. This is important to understanding this technique, as what you do on a Submaster will then also be affected by any processing you normally have on the master bus. So depending on how you like to have your session set up, you may need to adjust things here. Now you know what a Submaster is, let's talk about how you can use this. The idea is to drive different plugins harder at key points of your mix to make them react differently based on what's happening in the arrangement. For instance, in this pre-chorus section of my mix, I wanted things to gradually sound more gritty and distorted right before things drop back into the chorus. I'll play you the before and after so you can first hear what this trick can add to your mix. Now you could in theory do all this on the master bus, but there's a couple of reasons why you might want to do this on a Submaster instead. The first is that it's a little cleaner from a visual standpoint. Personally, I like to only have a few plugins on my master bus at all times, so having a separate track that I can then add EQ, compression, saturation and so on to, and then also automate into, just feels cleaner to me. Like I also mentioned, you can create different combinations of Submasters too. Maybe you want one that is everything except the vocals, so you drive this harder during more dense arrangement sections, whilst leaving your vocal tracks clean and unaffected by the additional processing. You can also choose to send different individual tracks or buses to a Submaster, instead of having everything in your session automatically being routed to the master bus, like how most DAWs do by default, so it offers a little more flexibility in that case. Along with using Submasters creatively, you can also use them to speed up rendering processes, like if your client requests multiple versions of the same mix, say they want the printed 2-track mix, an instrumental and an a cappella. You could set up 3 Submasters for these and then bounce everything in one go instead of one at a time. Now I'll briefly go over my session layout so you can get an idea of how you can add this to your own template. For me, I have a pretty large template that might look a little confusing, but it just boils down to individual tracks which are then sent to folders, basically a bus with some added functions in Reaper. All these are then sent to my Submaster, which then goes into my master bus. If that sounds a little confusing, I've made a simple diagram which shows you the signal path and how each type of track is routed to the next. So we go from individual tracks to folders or buses, to Submasters, and then finally to the master bus. Hopefully that makes things a little easier to understand from a visual point of view. Because of the way I have my template set out, if I wanted to create a Submaster, I can just come up to the top of my tracks, press Ctrl T to add a new track, and then press the folder icon in the bottom left hand corner of this track. Now every track underneath this in my session will then be routed to the single fader, which is then sent to my master bus. If your DAW doesn't have a folder function, then you can create a new track and simply route all your bus outputs to the newly created track, which will then be sent to your master bus. Both versions do the same thing, I just like the simplicity of the folder function. Now the fun part comes from experimenting with different chains of plugins or sending different groups of tracks to your Submaster and affecting them in various ways throughout your mix. One chain I like to use is a gain plugin, followed by some type of saturation that then goes into a limiter. The gain plugin is only being used to drive the saturation via automation. You don't actually need this, but I found using a very precise gain plugin like this far easier to automate in real time than using faders or the input function on most saturation plugins. For the saturation, I'm using an 1176 style compressor with the comp off button engaged, meaning it's only adding the inbuilt harmonic saturation to the signal that I'm passing through it, and then the limiter is simply there to handle any overs that may occur from the automation. If you usually mix through a limiter on your master bus, then you could omit this. Then I like to find a point in my mix that I want to liven up with this technique. For this song, the second half of the verse has this 4 on the floor drum beat switch up, so I felt like pushing the whole mix harder at this one point to match what was happening in the arrangement. To do this, I'll set the cursor about 1 bar before the start of where I want to ride the fader, and then I'll push this back and forth and try and lock in with the groove of the drums. Make sure you set your automation mode to touch if you want to do this in real time, or you could always draw this in after if you prefer. I'll render out 2 versions of this section, one using the Submaster automation and one without, and then see what version you prefer. The reason this can work so well is because you're actually pushing and pulling the mix into these different inserts, which in turn react differently and usually more aggressively to the changes in gain that are being introduced. Instead of treating it like a flat signal that you're just applying one or more types of compression or saturation to, you're also pushing against the limiter, which acts like a ceiling or barrier, stopping your mix from going too far. Of course, you can easily misuse or abuse this effect, but that's kind of the idea here. If you're going for an ultra clean, pristine recording, then you may want to steer clear. But if you're trying to add some life and character into your mix, then this really does help. Another way I like to use this is with plugins that allow you to link the input and outputs together. So when you increase one, the other decreases, meaning you shouldn't in theory have any added gain, you'll just be left with a harmonically altered signal. I really like doing this with a tape machine, where I had the input and output set to 0, and then increase or decrease this at certain points during the mix. By clicking the chain button here, it will link the input and output together, so you shouldn't hear any increase in volume, you'll just be hearing the different levels of saturation that are then applied to your mix as you increase or decrease the buttons. So here I'm using the tape saturation to clip and soften the transients of my mix as the pre-chorus builds into the chorus. Once it gets into the chorus, I'll bypass this and the mix will revert back to the punchy sound I've already built into it. But this little added moment with the tape saturation automation helps to contrast these two sections nicely. As I mentioned before, if you want to improve your mixes and further your career, then consider checking out Sage Audio's mixing and mastering membership. As a member myself, I have to say it's really helped me progress ever since I first joined. For signing up, you'll receive 50 free mastered songs per year, along with having your own trusted engineer who will get to know your sound and be able to craft the best masters for your mixes. On top of that, they'll also offer unlimited revisions, ensuring you're always satisfied with the final outcome of your project. I've also found a one-on-one mentorship extremely helpful, as you're able to receive mixing feedback and detailed suggestions from professional engineers to improve your mixes. This feature alone will help you level up your skills as you receive personalized guidance tailored towards your specific needs and goals. Along with this, they also grant you access to Sage Audio University, where you'll find in-depth courses on mixing and mastering and walkthrough sessions for mixing multiple genres. You'll have the chance to enter their mixing and mastering competitions and grow your skills within their dedicated community. The membership also includes over 70 gigabytes worth of downloadable content and over 700 in-depth mixing and mastering videos. Start creating professional sounding mixes now and get an exclusive 70% discount by using the link in the description when you join today.